In most histories of the American Civil War, the story stops at the border. It's framed as a conflict contained within a single, breaking nation, the North and the South locked in a struggle over the future of the Republic. But the map of North America in 1861 shows a very different reality just past the front lines. What we know today as Canada was not yet a unified country, but a vulnerable string of separate British colonies scattered across the northern frontier. When the shooting started, Queen Victoria established a strict diplomatic stance for the entire British Empire, official neutrality. This neutrality was tested almost immediately. In 1861, the U.S. Navy intercepted a British ship to capture 2 Confederate diplomats. Britain prepared to send thousands of troops to its North American colonies in response, only to discover that the local Canadian militia was little more than a paper force of untrained volunteers. War between Britain and the U.S. seemed imminent, but Abraham Lincoln strategically de-escalated the crisis, famously deciding to focus on the South by fighting one war at a time. Diplomacy had secured an official peace, but the border itself remained a porous geographic vacuum. With no real military force to police it, the line between neutral territory and the American battlefield began to blur. At the grassroots level, everyday citizens in British North America overwhelmingly favored the Union. This sympathy was deeply rooted in colonial law. Slavery was already outlawed throughout the provinces, and for decades they had served as the final stop on the Underground Railroad for those escaping the South. The data shows a staggering level of involvement. Up to 50,000 British North Americans crossed the border to enlist in the Northern Army. Among these volunteers was Anderson Ruffin Abbott. Born in Toronto to a family that had fled Alabama, Abbott was a fully qualified physician determined to join the abolitionist cause. Prejudice initially blocked Abbott from becoming a military surgeon, but he eventually secured a position at a Washington hospital. His service there earned him multiple commendations and made him a known acquaintance of President Lincoln. For tens of thousands of ordinary colonial citizens, British neutrality was a policy they were willing to ignore to join the fight against slavery. However, a sharp class divide existed. While the masses volunteered for the North, the political and business elites of the colonies often favored the Confederacy. In Halifax, the prominent merchant Benjamin Weir became a primary example of this elite sympathy. Weir flew the Confederate flag outside his office and used the port to outfit blockade runners. He provided the South with arms and supplies in exchange for cotton harvested by enslaved labor, which he then traded at high prices in Britain. This leniency turned the colonies into an operational base for Southern raids. In Vermont, Confederate agents launched an attack from Canadian soil to rob the banks of St. Albans, killing several people before retreating back across the border to safety. Montreal became the primary northern hub for Confederate espionage. Southern agents lived and worked there openly, rarely bothered by local authorities who were governed by the official policy of neutrality. This environment made the city a staging ground for the war's final acts. In Montreal, John Wilkes Booth met with Confederate emissaries and gathered intelligence as he began planning the assassination of the U.S. president. By providing a sanctuary for Southern money and intelligence, the colonial elite effectively weaponized British territory against the Union. When the war ended, the newly unified United States held a deep grievance against the British colonies for harboring Confederate raiders and spies. This tension found a flashpoint in the Fenian Brotherhood, a militant group of Irish-American Union veterans who had spent the last 4 years in combat. The Fenians launched a series of armed raids into Canada from U.S. soil, hoping to capture the colonies and use them as leverage to secure Irish independence from Britain. Despite the violations of the border, Washington did little to stop the Fenian invasions. It was a calculated silence, a retaliation for the years the colonies had allowed Confederate agents to operate with impunity. Playing both sides of the conflict had backfired. The fractured colonies were now left to defend a massive border against a battle-hardened neighbor that no longer cared if they were invaded. Panic spread across the separate provinces. It was clear that Britain could not, or would not, defend the vast border, and the individual colonies were too weak to stand alone. The looming threat of American annexation forced a historic political shift. The colonies realized their only chance at survival was to abandon their separate identities and unify. This map illustrates the result, the 1867 Federation. The separate colonies fused into a single, self-governing nation capable of its own defense. In a strange historical irony, the war fought to keep the United States together was the very thing that forced the creation of a new nation on its northern border.